This episode is in partnership with Authority Magazine. Authority Magazine, a Medium publication, is devoted to sharing in-depth and interesting interviews featuring people who are authorities in business, pop culture, wellness, social impact, and tech. Some of us may be living comfortable lives, but globally there are many out there who simply are not.
War, famine, injustice, all of it causes irreparable harm. But what's to be done?
Well, today's guest is Avril Benoit, recently retired CEO of Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders in the USA, and a proud Canadian. Avril, welcome to Believe in People.
Thanks for having me.
Can I just start off by asking you a blunt question, and that is, why does it take so much courage to help other people?
I don't know that it does.
Thank you.
Why do you think it does?
Why is it so hard for us to realize that there are so many people out there who are in need?
Well, that's a whole other question. I think our ability to pay attention to what's happening to other people is quite limited. And the current media ecosystem, social media ecosystem, everything that's happening with AI is creating a whole cognitive dissonance between what a neighbor in need even is telling you is going on versus what you see on screen. But in terms of helping people, look, I think it's for those who have experienced volunteering, for example, in the community or for an organization in whatever capacity, you can not only be motivated by helping of others, which, okay, to work in a conflict zone, to put your hand up and say, I'm going to be a humanitarian aid worker, I'm going to help people in Darfur in Sudan right now. Obviously, you have to have a certain risk tolerance for that kind of helping others. But in the helping of others, just generally speaking, and no matter what job I had, whether when I was a journalist or when I was an executive in a humanitarian organization, volunteering in my community, my own community, which takes no courage, had all kinds of intrinsic benefits for me. So in fact, helping others was in some ways the obviously the initial motivation. You think, what a great cause! I'm going to roll up my sleeves. Yeah, count me in. But then you begin to realize how wonderful it is to feel part of a community, to get to know your neighbors, to have that experience of giving. And so, it takes zero courage and it benefits all around.
And Avril, what sparked this for you early on? What made the decision for you to go into journalism?
Well, initially, my attraction to journalism was my passion for radio. So as a kid, I listened to radio all the time. I was the kind of kid who had a radio under my pillow and was checking out all the weird channels that you could pick up from distant places, AM radio back in the day, and just a fascination for all the different kinds of listening experiences that radio offered. So journalism was something I kind of fell into initially as a small town reporter after a few years of volunteering at a community campus radio station, beginning to read the news there. One thing led to another. I was a technician at a radio station. And then, the funny story about how I ended up reading the news on that station is that I was the technician, young. I was like 19. I had dropped out of university. And the host of the program, and this was a multicultural radio station in Toronto, broadcasting in 20 languages, and the host of the morning Portuguese program on New Year's Day said to me, Avril, I'm way too hungover to do the news today. Can you do it? Wow. So 6 a.m., I said, sure, being a keener. And that's what actually launched my news broadcasting career, so to speak.
Wow.
The next day he said, well, you want to do it again?
Yeah,
sure.
Exactly.
Of course. And then, it was our little secret for a while because, of course, no boss of a radio station is actually listening at 6 a.m.
Avril, under my pillow, I used to be able to get
WOWO, Fort Wayne, Indiana, 50,000 watts, the voice of big farming and big business. And I used to get that under my thing, listening to
Yeah.
Time Has Come Today by the Chambers Brothers, which I don't even know where that just came from, but I'm riffing on what you just said. What, I mean, from journalism, we worked together at the CBC.
Mhm.
We were actually neighbors in Montreal, which is a nice thing. Um, but was that a difficult? You went to the communications section of MSF, Doctors Without Borders, and that, I mean, was that an easy step to make? Because I mean, I've always looked at journalism, which is why we're doing this podcast, as a service.
Mhm.
I think a lot of people look at it as a business, and it is a business. But for me, I thought it was a service, especially working for CBC, for example. Um, but MSF was a service as well.
I had covered MSF as a journalism. So by the time I left, I had been a journalist for 20 years, and I had interviewed a lot of people with the organization. And MSF stands for Médecins Sans Frontières. That's the original French name. And from that, you get all the translated versions, such as Doctors Without Borders in English. And I really found the organization to be um, willing to tell the truth, which in journalism, you interview people who are giving you the spin, or they're giving you the marketing. They're not really telling you what is hard about the work, what is maybe a myth about the work. And here is Doctors Without Borders that I found consistently was willing to just spell it out. And on the ground, when I met them, and I think the first time I met them was in Kibera, a slum in Nairobi, where I was working on a radio documentary. I was actually there thinking I was going to be shadowing Stephen Lewis, who was on a visit. Stephen Lewis at that time, and he has a long-standing political and diplomatic career, but he was the UN Special Representative for HIV in Africa. And I thought I'd be doing a story about him, and he was visiting with some MSF people who were running a clinic in this slum. And they were the ones who enchanted me. I just thought, wow, can I hang out a little more? And that's what led to, for me, just yet again, proof that here was an organization that was the real deal. So when the communications role opened up to be director of communications, what I found in the transition was that it was really, from a cultural perspective, quite seamless. I was working among colleagues who were impatient, had a strong sense of purpose, of meaning in the work, especially for those who were in public interest journalism. There was a sense of urgency and also a kind of cynicism sometimes. All the kind of personality characteristics that I was familiar with, I found in this organization. The transition for me was in going from being a single contributor to the very scary experience of being a manager and suddenly being responsible for other people's work. And so that in fact was the sharp transition. And anyone who has gone through that knows what it feels like, where suddenly you're responsible for a whole team and a budget, and you've got to do all this reporting. And what is this all about? So that's where I found it was harder. And then the organization pulled me in step by step, often sending me on assignment because of my journalism background, to help us bear witness, which is one of the pillars of the organization, is medical humanitarian action first. Bearing witness is the second of the two pillars of its identity, of its social mission, its purpose. And so that then led to just being thrown into the deep end over and over and over again, to the point where after 19 years, I've just wrapped up as CEO in New York, having really seen so many facets of the organization and done different kinds of jobs in the organization in different locations of the world.
And then now that you're leading, or were leading Doctors Without Borders, meaning facing impossible moral choices, probably daily, how did you personally stay grounded, like when the world was sort of maybe feels unfixable?
It's tough. And many of my colleagues don't manage to stay grounded as long as I did. And that's one of the reasons that I actually feel good about moving on, is I think, you know what, that's enough. 19 years
It's a lot.
immersed in wars, displacement, refugee crises, climate crises, disease outbreaks, rape, all the kinds of cruelties of humanity are kind of in your face all the time. And you do experience a vicarious trauma from that accumulated exposure, not to mention all the time that I spent on the ground with our humanitarian teams and interacting with the populations and the patients that we were trying to help. And I would say, I did learn over time, and this is partly born of the journalistic training, that you really do, on some level, have to maintain your humanity, your ability to empathize, but compartmentalize.
Yeah.
This is how clinicians do it too. It doesn't make us great partners or friends sometimes because we can compartmentalize so well. But you're there to do a job. You have to focus on your deadline. You have to get the work done. You cannot be sidetracked by too much internal turmoil about what you're seeing and experiencing. And then when you are out of the moment of delivering on the work, you have to find all the things that make you happy and grounded, such as walking in nature, going for a hike. I play ice hockey. I try to have fun. Just yesterday, I did a little dance class of Afro-Caribbean dance, and like just the things that kind of make you whole in those small bursts, and then the sustaining of friendships with even family members that help you feel like it's not just your work that defines you, that you really do have an identity outside of that. And that is something that you have to work at. And over the years, and with all the seasoning and the wisdom that comes with age, you do get better at it, I hope.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's funny. Amy and I were speaking earlier about the Bigelow film, Hurt Locker. And as someone like you has been to numerous war zones, the hardest part for me, Avril, was the scene in that film where the soldier, has been there. The altruistic chaplain gets blown up. The altruistic guy is always the guy that dies. But the soldier comes home, and the minute he gets home, he wants to go back.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I found going in and out of these places was that you would get in, and it became very disturbing, actually. And that's why so many journalists don't turn to their friends. They turn to like beer, and alcohol and things. And that's a real challenge. But you would be begging to get out. And then when you got out, you would be begging to go back. And you couldn't find any equilibrium in what it was that you were doing. And that's, I guess, why I asked the first question, is why is it so hard for people to help? But I mean, helping like that isn't such an easy thing either. Surely it must traumatize those who are giving the aid.
It does. And when you have been to a place and then it's in the news. So, for example, what's happening in Sudan right now with
Yes.
the war. So I was in Darfur just a couple of years ago at the beginning of a lot of the worst of this, and spoke in the refugee camps in Chad, where so many hundreds of thousands from the Darfur region of Sudan had fled, and the stories they told me of the targeting that they had experienced because of their non-Arab identities, Masalit, Zaghawa, different ethnic groups, and how the women were treated, and the euphemisms that they would have to put around rape because of all the stigma in their community. And these are women who hope one day to find out what happened to their husband who disappeared in the early going. And now they're in a refugee camp with many children, mouths to feed, and an insufficient humanitarian response. And so when I read now about what is happening in El Fasher, when I read about what is happening in Sudan, more broadly speaking, I'm a little bit triggered, you know, and it's like, oof, do I want to read this? Because I can imagine it, I can visualize it. I know exactly what it's like. I know what the people are like. I know what the dynamics are like of the conflict. I know who the bad guys are. They're all, you know, anybody with a weapon is probably complicit in all kinds of war crimes and horrible deeds. And so I have to manage then my own consumption of news now that I'm out of it, right? Because here I am I have an opportunity after a job like this and a career like this to kind of recenter and recharge and reconnect with those essential things that will help me to maybe step up in the future. But Kevin, what you were talking about, you know, people wanting to go back, I've seen it a million times.
Yeah.
And of course, all of us who step away from that adrenaline fueled, you know, exhilarating kind of work, there is I think, a compulsion to have, you know, all you know, that stress hormone back in your body. And I'm really trying to focus on moving on from that and being a little healthier you know, with this time that I have, and we'll see where I end up in the future, you know, but it's something that you have to really think about, because it's exciting work. It's meaningful. You're helping people. You're in a place where you absolutely understand the value of your presence, and of the skill set that, in my case, the organization was bringing: medical, life-saving, delivering babies safely, vaccinating children, treating malnourished children. I mean, it's all absolutely essential. And it made me so proud to be part of those teams, that I know there will come, you know, moments in the, you know, middle of the night where I say, ooh, I miss that. So I hope my friends and family around me remind me, Avril, you
Exactly. I
said.
was just going to ask you that. I was going to ask you, like,
You already
how
did it.
are you doing
Yeah.
with this transition?
Yeah,
Like,
it was hard in the first couple of weeks. I'm only, as we're talking now, I'm only a month into it, and I already feel better and lighter and happier in some ways. Because certainly the 2 years leading up to my departure of Gaza was particularly heavy for us as an organization, as humanitarians, as people, as New Yorkers, with just how horrible it was for everybody involved, and just having to carry the burden of responsibility of holding the organization together through that. It it really did grind me down. So the timing of my term limit departure, which was unrelated to that, actually came at a point where I actually was doggone tired.
yeah, I bet.
Well, there has to be a lot of burnout in that. Maybe we should just talk a little bit about, you know, how MSF came about, how Doctors Without Borders came about. The organization has been around for many, many years. And where is it? I mean, you say it's in 90 odd countries or 60
Mhm.
countries. I can't remember what it is that you said, but what are its roots? Where does it come from? Is it like Red Cross? Is it like those kinds of organizations?
Yeah, there are a couple of mythologies about the origin story of the organization, but the simplest way to describe it is that some doctors who were working for the French Red Cross in Nigeria in the Biafra crisis
Yeah.
came back and got together with some journalist friends, expressing frustration at the very strict neutrality of the Red Cross at a time when there were allegations that the aid cargo planes were bringing in not just food, but weapons
Hmm.
for one side in the conflict, and how they were, you know, also that some of the malnutrition in that crisis was being manipulated, and you know, people were being forcibly starved by one side, you know, things like this, that they were just frustrated that they couldn't express it and speak out more forcefully. So the journalists and the doctors got together and created Médecins Sans Frontières, MSF, which is the original acronym we still use. And again, that's translated to Doctors Without Borders. And from those origins, it really has spread as a movement. We are a collective of associations of like-minded people who want to come together in all kinds of countries to be able to offer our support to this work of saving lives and bearing witness. So yes, it's huge. Maybe 68,000 workers around the world, aid workers. Most of them are from the countries where the operations are taking place, with a few, specialist international workers who are mobile, so to speak, who go from place to place just to reinforce those efforts. And really with a focus on medical and humanitarian work. So there's not the kind of mission drift into things like education, which is important, but we don't do that, or building sustainable housing or economic development or peace building. We don't do any of that. It's really focused on the humanitarian medical work. And so, even though I'm no longer with the organization as an employee, I still very much feel part of the movement, and always will. And that's one sweet aspect of it, is that you can plug in and out, and still very much be a supporter. And I always will be, because I just had, just such a profound experience working with all these colleagues around the world. So from the origins, I mean, obviously there's a kind of a combative spirit. There's a overcoming obstacles kind of spirit. There's always a challenge to the status quo. So if the status quo is that people can't afford drugs for HIV or tuberculosis or anything like that, we're constantly challenging big pharma to drop the patents or reduce the prices, things like that. So there are many different aspects of the work that really can attract all kinds of disciplines. So it's not just doctors. It can be all the other kinds of dimensions, anything you would need to run an organization or a hospital, say. We need those kind of people supporting us.
Wow. I mean, and you think about it, there are so many things to be proud of the work that you've done and the work that you've also led, Avril. Is there anything that stands out during your term, or I guess the term being CEO of the organization? Just maybe a couple of things that come to mind.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that even from a management and executive leadership perspective, we invested a lot in thinking through how can we level up our internal management, how we structure things to be as efficient as possible and as successful as possible. And in a place like the United States, one thing that the US government has decided it's not doing anymore is international aid, humanitarian aid in any way that is adjacent to humanitarian principles of impartiality, independence, and neutrality, and what have you. And to me, over the time that I was CEO, the fact that Americans stepped up to financially support us, to donate to the organization at a time when obviously there are many really good causes out there, local causes, give at home first kind of rhetoric. The fact that US people, and honestly, it's people around the world, in every place where we have fundraising activities. I mean, people are really contributing a lot, and it just kept growing and growing and growing. And I guess what makes me feel so thankful, so filled with gratitude for that, is that obviously the organization in some way was representing a good in the world, a proxy for what an individual who's not going to go to a war zone or an Ebola outbreak can offer in terms of extending a hand of support to somebody they will never meet. Yeah. It's not a hospital they got treated at, and they're going to put their name on the wing if you give a lot of money. I mean, you get nothing from donating for us. You're not going to get your name on anything. There's very little acknowledgement. We don't do galas, all this. So it to me, it's just heartening that year over year, and with every crisis, people stepped up and they stayed with us. Wow. And that to me is significant as a leader of a large nonprofit organization. So yeah, I mean, that to me was just outstanding, because for all the stress and strain and difficulty of the humanitarian work on the ground itself, we had backup from regular people giving $20 a month, and that kind of thing just encourages even our field teams, our operational teams, to know that in America, which has now got a reputation that I don't think most people with, heart and who care would want. They don't like being perceived as the pariah, political pariah of the world, as is now increasingly happening in terms of, with the tariff wars and all the threats to countries and all this kind of stuff that's happening at the moment. To know that so many Americans are really backing up this work. They like what we're doing. They support us, and they are with us all the way. That to me was amazing.
Now, I'm going to ask you a question before we let you go, and then Amy's going to ask you a positive question after, because I'm Mr. Negative. But what role, you're a journalist. What role do you think the media is playing these days? And do you think it's sufficient in bringing these situations to light? You've mentioned Sudan a couple of times.
Mhm.
When was the last time you saw Sudan on your television set?
Not on the mainstream old style cable channels. That we know, because it all, the number of minutes covering certain crises gets tracked, and it's missing. So the
Why?
media, well, because people don't want to watch it, and it's just the business model of most mainstream news outlets. But there are still some that I count on, and I want to support. So even if you look at, of the big ones, you still have a lot of excellent coverage on public media. So whether it's PBS, National Public Radio, the CBC, the BBC, but you also have Al Jazeera, The Guardian. The economic pressures on them are absolutely real. And then for more careful reading, there are many other media organizations that do make the effort. And I can think off the top of my head of the New Humanitarian, DevEx, niche websites. Even in terms of investigative journalism, you'll get some amazing stuff out of The Intercept. And then there are local media organizations that are worth supporting. In New York City, we have a few really good ones. And
Block Club in Chicago.
yeah, and Hellgate, there are a bunch of them, and so it is, and if you look on Substack or YouTube, you are getting unique voices. Zeteo, there are various efforts to try to bring us the truth. Now, the fact is, there are major headwinds, and the way the social media outlets are trying to push back against clarity and honesty in access to information means that I am a big supporter of Wikipedia, the human being volunteer editors who do the best they can to bring us a balanced, factual view of the world. And so outlets like that, to me, deserve all the support we can give them.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And Avril, we first of all, thank you for being on Believe in People. And as this is Believe in People, I want to ask you: many people see humanitarians as heroes. We sort of touched on that, but I imagine it's not about that. It's about humanity. So, how do you define what it means to believe in people after all that you've seen?
Well, yeah, in an organization like Doctors Without Borders, we really recoil from the label hero. Because we see so much courage actually among the people that the populations that we're helping, the people that are in the crisis themselves, who include most of our staff. In a place like Sudan, I would guess that maybe 90% of our own staff there, like in Gaza, have lost their homes.
Yeah.
Destroyed, and they're separated from family, and children have been killed, and so on. So they're the ones that, the very fact that they step up and continue to help their people and show up in the hospital for their shifts, and they do everything they can to help others. That to us is so admirable. And the fact that they are there and we can help as outsiders to a crisis situation, that we can offer the best, whatever help it is, whether it's financial or surgical, that the fact that we do come together, that does give me hope in people. The very fact that there are humanitarians who are stepping up, always initially from the community itself, and then with whatever the international community can offer. It is really profoundly important, and it shatters me that humanitarian aid, international aid, generally speaking, is facing such horrendous financial outlook right now, with the drop in funding from many, many governments, and then the complete collapse of funding from the US government. It's a time when we really need the generosity of everyone, and the fact that it is there, that people are contributing, makes a huge difference in holding up my hope in humanity and in people.
Avril Benoit, Doctors Without Borders, thank you very much for being so generous with your time, which is also important. Thanks very much, Avril, for being with us.
Anytime. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Well, my takeaway from this is that she used the phrase, the value of your presence. And I think that that's what anyone who volunteers, be it overseas or in your backyard, that's the contribution you make, the value of your presence. And her presence on our show was just really inspiring. Thank you, Avril.
Yeah, that's so true. And I mean, I really actually nothing to add, because you're absolutely right. So thank you for that. Thank you, Avril. And if you've enjoyed this or been inspired by this episode, please subscribe to Believe in People.
Thank you.